Hey, let's talk about records, cheap records. Records that you could probably find online or in your local record store if you're lucky to have a local record store that's worth going to. Cheap heat, that's what this is all about. Records are inexpensive that are pretty damn good. Anyway, let's get right down to it. First record I'm going to talk about is something I got online many years ago. And it came in this anonymous cover, white cover. Advanced reviewer copy, confidential. It's a secret, it's confidential. Well, a lot of these found their way out into the mass, non-reviewing public. And this is by a group called Matrix. There's a bunch of different artists on this label. The label is Pro-Gress Records, I believe. P-R-O-G-R-E-S-S Records, but it's Pro.Gress Records because they were produced by a guy named T.J. Gress. Anyway, this one's by a group called Matrix, and it's really cool. It can be had for next to nothing. There's a bunch of copies on Discogs. There is a version with cover art that's more expensive. But this has got nothing. No personnel, no nothing. The personnel is listed in a photo on the copy with the cover art on Discogs. That's important. Anyway, the music on this record it's kind of hard to describe. It's sort of soft, machiney, whimsical, sort of jazz rock, Zappa-esque madness. It's really cool. I really like this record a lot. It's by a group called Matrix. Hardly the most original name. There's literally 400 plus bands on Discogs with the word Matrix in their names. This one, however, is really worth chasing down. This is number 43, Matrix 43 on Discogs. These can be found in the bins, though. It has happened. It's not a rare record, but it's really good. And the reason why I wanted to mention the one version with the cover art is because you can tell that one of the artists on the record is a guitar player named Jack Grassel. And he's really interesting because this came out in the 70s. In the mid-80s, Jack Grassel resurfaced with his own record, which is what we're listening to now. It's pretty phenomenal. It's called Magic Serial, self-released record. And just local guys on it sounds like. New Berlin, Wisconsin. So he's like from Milwaukee, Madison, someplace like that in Wisconsin. It's a really cool record, as you can tell. Good jazz rock record. A little bit more heavily towards the jazz end of the spectrum, but this is a really cool fusion cut. And Jack Grassel standing out there with his members-only jacket, looking cool. This was one of the first records that Christopher Cole hit me to, and I knew he was onto something when I got this. And I'm like, this is great. So I began to be schooled by Christopher Cole. This guy is endless knowledge and very generous with it. Anyway, the interesting thing about this record, and I love all the connections, you know what I'm saying? There's a musician on here called Jeff Pietrangelo. He plays trumpet on a few tracks on this. And this is kind of all over the place stylistically, as a lot of these small label records are. The artist is trying to prove himself and show how, diverse he is. And no exception here. You'll see the next track is completely different. Anyway, I thought it was really interesting. Jeff Pietrangelo is on this record. He might have been on the earlier Matrix record, I don't know. But Jeff Pietrangelo was also in a group called Matrix that is completely different from the Jack Grassel Matrix. Go figure. Anyway, these guys, they recorded this record for their own label. It's quite good. It's sort of progressive rock and jazz rock mixed together. Definite Mahavishnu influence here. Pretty complicated pieces, some vocals, but they don't kill the deal. It's still a decent record. Anyway, Matrix Had Jeff Pietrangelo in it. He was one of the main guys in the group, this Matrix. These guys went on, they moved to LA, recorded a bunch of records for Warner Brothers, which were pretty decent. There was at least 3 of them. We used to play them on the college radio station. They came out in the late 70s. This is from 75. This was re-released on RCA. I believe they remastered it. I prefer this version. I've had them both. Oddly enough, this is their debut. When it came out on RCA, it was called Matrix IX, Matrix 9. Don't ask me why. I think because there's 9 guys in the group. But this is a cool record. It could be had for next to nothing. And there's sort of a funky connection between this record and this record. And what we're listening, well, no, and this record. Go figure, huh? It's a small world. I just love stuff like that. Moving right along, we're going to go to Boston and check out, I wish I could play a little bit of each one of these records. This guy is named Randy Roos, and he's sort of a Boston legend. Really excellent guitar player. Once again, you see the double neck guitar on the cover. That is, for me, you must buy this record. You see the double neck guitar. I'm all over that. Anyway, this is a really cool fusion record. It's a little laid back, a little bit more laid back than I expected, but it turns out it's quite a good listen. And oddly enough, it's got another guitar player on it who later became really famous. His name's Mike Stern, and he might be, this might be his first recorded appearance. And but Randy Roos is a really great musician, really great guitar player. He's in a band called Orchestra Luna that recorded one record for CBS and kind of sunk without a trace. But I did not care for it. It had these operatic vocals that I just did not go for. But the music was kind of cool. Illyrio Lima is also on this, who was in Weather Report for a hot minute on percussion, plays percussion on this. And Neil Steubenhouse, who later became a big name New York session guy, is the bass player. And there's a drummer on here that I've never heard of, but he's really good. Anyway, check it out. It comes on clear vinyl, too. And it's this really good guitar-based fusion. Can't not recommend it to you. It's really good if you like jazz rock. Here's another jazz rock band that you might not have heard of. They're sort of the whimsical, Muffins, Canterbury-esque variety. Only these guys were based in L.A. And they had sort of a mellow jazz vibe as well. Headless Household is the name of the band. And this is their debut record. They actually went on and did 3 or 4 more. None as good as this. This is really more pushing the stylistic envelope. Definitely a Zappa-esque, Canterbury-esque sort of vibe running throughout this record. The interesting thing about this record, besides the music, is that it's co-led by a music journalist named Joseph Woodard, who wrote for Downbeat for years. Still writes, still is active. He's really a fine guitar player too. So this is a cool record and can be had for a pittance. And you can see they're all kind of whimsical back there on the back cover. Really good musicians. A number of interesting guests on here playing different instruments. Some vocals, some Chapman stick. It's a cool record. It's very varied. I like it a lot. I got it at Amoeba for $5. Here's a record that you might not be aware of that came out on a major label. It's on Columbia, and in 1971 or 72. And the band is called Contraband, and the title of their album is Time and Space. And very psychedelic collage cover here. Anyway, this is a fantastic record. This is a phenomenal record. If you're into the whole post Bitches Brew, Miles Davis, heavy Fender Rhodes with ring modulator type of sound, you got to get this. This is really cool. Great personnel too. Peter Robinson on keyboards. Not the Peter Robinson of Brand X and Sun Treader fame and Ablution fame. Not that Peter Robinson. That's the UK Peter Robinson. This is the US Peter Robinson. He went on to play with Phil Woods and subsequently became a big name in the LA studios doing soundtracks and TV shows and stuff like that. Did a classical record that's actually really cool on his own Testament Records label. Anyway, great personnel here. Brian Moffat on drums, who was also on that plugged in Phil Woods record a few years later. David Pritchard on guitar, not the Canadian composer of the same name, the U.S. guitar player. David Pritchard played with Gary Burton, had his own solo records, which are really nice on the Inner City label. And who else? Bruce Kale on bass, who is in Spontaneous Music Ensemble, actually, believe it or not. And Charles Orania on saxophones. I believe he was in on the Grand Wazoo, maybe, and maybe a couple of other Zappa things. I'm not sure, though. I could be wrong about that. I know he was sort of a LA studio guy later on. Anyway, this is a great record. And like I said, if you like electric piano with ring modulator and sort of a bitches brew, post in a silent way kind of sound, this Contraband record is a must-have. Here's a band I'm pretty sure you've never heard of, and I'm going to start with their most recent record, which is how I got into them. They're called District 6, and it's basically a UK-based band, but they've got this heavy connection to South Africa, and it's quite apparent in their music. Really very highly influenced by guys like Abdullah Ibrahim and all the township jazz guys, Dudu Pukwana and Mongezi Feza. None of those guys are on this record. Chris McGregor is, though. Chris McGregor is a wonderful South African pianist, composer, social justice warrior who passed away a few years ago, had his own big band, Brotherhood of the Breath. This is an unusual example of him playing in a small band. And this band, except for Chris McGregor, had very stable personnel. The drummer was always Brian Abrams, another great South African musician. Dill Katz on electric bass, sort of the UK's answer to Jaco Pastorius. Wonderful, technical, beautiful bass tone, fantastic technique. Jim Dvorak on trumpets, cornets. He's an American, actually, American expat. Harrison Smith on saxophones, better known as a free jazz player, but here he's playing in a more conventional bag, but not totally conventional. This is a killer record. It gets out there, but it's just got that South African thing going on. So this was recorded in '87, and it's chock full of McGregor's compositions. This was a live record they did in 1985 without McGregor. The previous pianist was a guy named Mervyn Africa, who's still active in the UK, a phenomenal piano player, not second fiddle to McGregor at all, his equal every bit. And this features a lot of his compositions. The rest of the lineup's the same. And this is a good record. I wouldn't say it's a great record. It's a live record, so it's got that feel. But it's really good. Worth checking out if you're really into the whole South African jazz, township jazz thing, although they do so much more than township jazz. This is their first LP. They did a cassette before this. I'm not into cassettes, but the cassette is not cheap. This is cheap. I got this for £5 plus postage. The postage was a lot more expensive than the cost of the record. And it's hard for me to believe that this is cheap heat, but it is not an expensive record. Akuzwakale is the name of the record. Again, same personnel, Dill Katz, Jim Dvorak, Harrison Smith, Brian Abrahams, Mervyn Africa on piano. This also has a guitar player by the name of Russell Herman, another South African guy who in his own right is a very interesting musician, did some really interesting and very hard to find music in South Africa. And this also had an additional saxophonist named Ruthie Smith. I don't know if she's a relationship to Harrison Smith, but she was in a British band called the Guest Stars, sort of all-female, really cool jazz band. Anyway, this is a great record. This is a profoundly great record. This is every bit as good as To Be Free, the first one of theirs that I showed you. The South African influences are a little bit more pronounced here. This gets a little funky at times, but not in a sold-out sort of way. Very, very cool record. And again, especially if you're in Europe, these records, even though they came out on small labels, fairly obscure, African influences, still inexpensive, I don't get it. Coming back over to the United States, I'm going to talk about 3 records by unjustly not well-known musician named Baird Hersey. Baird Hersey is an amazing guitar player and composer. Now he does overtone singing. He doesn't really play much guitar anymore. A lot of his music is associated with an amazing percussionist and vocalist named David Moss, who had his own very unique band for years, mostly in Europe. He's back in the States now. He's given several shows. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's still in Berlin. Anyway, he's given several shows at the Outpost. There's a connection there. The Outpost is a wonderful music venue in Albuquerque. There's a connection. Anyway, Baird Hersey, killer guitar player, was in a psych band called Swamp Gas back in the 60s. But went to college, studied with Bill Dixon, put out this record. This is his debut. This is a big band record. I'm usually not too keen on big band stuff, but this is excellent. And it gets out there. Bill Dixon is a whole side of it that's sidelong avant-garde big band piece dedicated to Bill Dixon. But it's really cool. And it's got David Moss doing his thing on it. Dave Leibman is on this. That's why I bought this when I was a kid. Still am a big Dave Leibman fan. Hersey and Year the Year subsequently recorded 2 follow-up albums on Arista Novus, sort of the avant-garde jazz wing of the Arista label. I believe these are all produced by Michael Cuscuno, the great jazz writer and producer. These records are phenomenal. If you like heavy-duty jazz rock fusion with horns, you got to get these. They're challenging, wonderful records. Hersey just shreds on guitar. Great musicians, all Boston-based. Mark Harvey's on this. Tommy Campbell's on these. Of course, David Moss, I've already mentioned. Daniel Mott, a guy who plays only electric trumpet, is on both of these. These are just fantastic records. Can't say enough good stuff about them. And they're cheap, as is the debut, which has more of a big band sound. This is like 8 or 9 guys as opposed to like 24 guys. No keyboards, lots of guitar. Finally, just wrapping up, a little less avant-garde. Teasin by Cornell Dupree. And I guess he's kind of obscure because he's definitely been a session guy for most of his life. Played on a lot of CTI records. Played on a lot of like Aretha Franklin records and things like that. Really a fantastic and very unique guitar player who's sort of equal parts jazz guitar, a la Eric Gale or David T. Walker or Grant Green, and equal parts that vein of soul jazz, equal parts B.B. King, Albert Collins, Lightnin' Hopkins. You can really hear the blues influence in this guy's playing. This is just a fantastic, funky record with great players. I believe Richard T's on this. Great horn section, Trevor Kohler, John Faddis, Garnett Brown, Chuck Rainey on bass, Bernard Purdy on drums. This record gets no traction, and it's just so funky and so bluesy. And unlike a lot of the other stuff I've talked about, not a brow furrower. Just a simple, enjoyable funk jazz record. Highly recommended. Anyway, all these records are cheap. All these records are great. I hope you go out there and find some of them. And good luck. Happy hunting.